For years, Sweden's Gripen was treated like the quiet kid in a room full of giants, while NATO poured attention, money, and hype into heavyweight programs like the F-35. The Gripen was often dismissed. It was called too small, too cheap, or simply not serious enough for a modern great power conflict. But now, something has changed. And what the Gripen has just demonstrated is exactly what NATO planners feared most, not because it failed, but because it succeeded in a way that exposes uncomfortable truths about the future of air warfare. The shock didn't come from raw speed or stealth alone. It came from how the Gripen fought, how it survived, and how it rewrote assumptions that NATO has relied on for decades. Modern NATO air doctrine is built on a simple idea: dominate the skies early, overwhelm the enemy with technology, and keep aircraft dependent on massive support networks. We're talking about AWACS. Tankers, satellites, long runways, and complex logistics chains. This system works beautifully as long as those systems remain untouched. The Gripen's recent performance questioned that assumption at its core. Designed by Sweden, a country that has spent generations preparing to fight alone against stronger adversaries, the Gripen was never meant to be glamorous. It was meant to survive. And survival, it turns out, is the most dangerous capability of all. What stunned observers was how the Gripen operated in conditions that would cripple most NATO air forces. Dispersed basing, minimal ground crews, rapid turnaround times, and the ability to operate from short, improvised roadways gave it a level of unpredictability NATO planners openly worry about but rarely admit. A Gripen doesn't need a massive airbase glowing on satellite imagery. It can disappear, rearm, refuel, and launch again before the enemy even confirms it landed. And this is where the fear begins. NATO's greatest advantage, its centralized coordination, also happens to be its greatest vulnerability. Tankers are limited. AWACS aircraft are high-value targets. Large airbases are easy to map and easier to hit. The Gripen was built for a world where all of those assets are under constant threat. In exercises and simulations, the Gripen demonstrated an ability to fight effectively even when cut off from those traditional lifelines. Using advanced data link systems, decentralized command structures, and highly autonomous mission logic, Gripen pilots were able to engage, disengage, and re-engage without waiting for permission from a floating command center in the sky. That autonomy is what truly rattled NATO analysts. Because if a relatively small, non-stealth aircraft can survive and perform in an environment where stealth jets depend on constant support, then the entire hierarchy of fifth-generation dominance becomes less stable than advertised. The Gripen's electronic warfare capabilities played a massive role in this shock. Instead of relying purely on stealth to avoid detection, the Gripen actively fights in the electromagnetic spectrum. Jamming, deception, signal manipulation, and sensor disruption allowed it to create uncertainty, something modern air defenses struggle with. Far more than brute force, in simple terms, the Gripen doesn't just hide, it confuses. And confusion is deadly. Air defense systems, even advanced ones, rely on clarity, clean tracks, reliable identification, predictable flight paths. The Gripen thrives on doing the opposite. By blending low observable features with aggressive electronic warfare and network tactics, it forced opposing forces into hesitation and in air combat. Hesitation is defeat. Another shock came from cost, and not in the way people expected. NATO countries have increasingly tied air power to extremely expensive platforms. Losing even one advanced stealth jet is a strategic and political disaster. The Gripen, by contrast, flips this logic. It is cheaper to build, cheaper to maintain, and faster to regenerate. That changes how commanders think about risk. When a nation can afford to fly more sorties, accept a higher operational tempo, and replace losses faster, it gains a form of strategic resilience that pure technology cannot buy. The Gripen showed that air superiority is not just about winning fights, it's about staying in the fight longer than your opponent expects. This is especially terrifying for NATO planners thinking about a prolonged high-intensity conflict. The Gripen's performance suggested that in a real war, air power may no longer be decided in the first few days. Instead, it could become a battle of endurance, adaptability, and logistics under fire, and in that kind of war, lighter, smarter, more flexible aircraft suddenly become extremely dangerous. Perhaps the most uncomfortable revelation was how well the Gripen integrated with mixed forces. It didn't need every aircraft around it to be identical or ultra-advanced. It could share data, act as a forward sensor, or even play the role of a sacrificial decoy to protect more valuable assets. That flexibility makes it a force multiplier rather than a solo star. NATO has long pursued exquisite systems few in number. Unmatched in capability, the Gripen represents the opposite philosophy: many, adaptable, survivable, and hard to pin down. Watching that philosophy succeed forced analysts to ask a painful question: what if the future isn't about the best jet but the most resilient system? This is why the world reacted with shock. Not because the Gripen suddenly became the most powerful fighter in the sky, but because it proved that the rules NATO thought were settled are not settled at all. Countries watching closely saw something else too. A path forward that doesn't require trillion-dollar budgets or total dependence on foreign supply chains. A way to build air power suited for modern warfare where satellites fall, runways burn, and networks are attacked every second. The Gripen didn't just perform well. It exposed a vulnerability in the way powerful alliances think about war. And that is far more dangerous than any single missile or maneuver. Because once fear enters planning rooms, doctrine begins to shift, budgets get questioned, assumptions get challenged, and rivals start asking whether the future of air combat belongs to massive, centralized systems or to smaller, smarter, harder to kill ones. Sweden's Gripen didn't shock the world by being louder or faster. It shocked the world by quietly proving that NATO's greatest strength might also be its greatest weakness, and now everyone is paying attention. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to subscribe for more content.